The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, but the insult inside it had been waiting for 5 years. Naomi Carter was standing in her glass-walled office on the 52nd floor of Carter Maison headquarters, watching Manhattan glitter beneath a pale winter sun, when her assistant placed the white envelope on the edge of her desk. Everything about it looked expensive. The paper was thick, the lettering pressed in gold, the seal stamped with the Whitmore family crest she had once been told she would never truly belong to. For a moment, the city seemed to go quiet behind the windows. The phones still rang beyond the frosted doors, designers still moved through the hallway with garment bags over their arms, and somewhere below, traffic rolled along Madison Avenue like a restless silver river, but inside Naomi's office, time folded in on itself. She knew that crest. She knew the sharp wings of the eagle, the polished arrogance of the initials, the kind of old money that never needed to shout because entire rooms had been trained to listen. Her assistant, Claire, hesitated. "Do you want me to open it?" Naomi did not answer right away. Her fingers rested lightly on the envelope, her nails painted the soft ivory shade she wore before every major decision. 5 years ago, those same hands had trembled while holding a divorce paper Ethan Whitmore had left beside a cold cup of coffee and a check large enough to buy silence but not dignity. 5 years ago, she had been Mrs. Naomi Whitmore, the black wife he loved behind closed doors and forgot how to defend in public. 5 years ago, she had walked out of a marble penthouse with one suitcase, one wedding ring in her coat pocket, and a heart so broken it made no sound at all. Now the world called her a millionaire founder, a fashion visionary, a woman whose name opened boardrooms that once closed in her face. But the envelope on her desk did not care about magazine covers or investment deals. It carried the past like perfume trapped in old silk. Naomi broke the seal herself. Inside was a wedding invitation for Ethan Whitmore and Madison Blake, printed in elegant script, announcing a ceremony at the Waldorf Meridian on Fifth Avenue, followed by a reception beneath the hotel's famous crystal dome. Naomi read it once. Then again. Her expression did not change. Claire's eyes moved from the invitation to Naomi's face, searching for pain, anger, anything human enough to understand. But Naomi had learned long ago that some wounds deserved privacy, and some battles were won before anyone saw the sword. Then she noticed the handwritten line at the bottom, slanted in dark blue ink, almost delicate in its cruelty. "Come see what a real wife looks like." The words sat there quietly, dressed like a joke, but carrying the weight of every dinner where Ethan had introduced her as a friend, every charity event where his mother looked past her as if kindness had a color requirement, every photograph cropped just enough to make her disappear. Claire inhaled sharply. "Naomi, that's disgusting." Naomi closed the invitation with the same calm she used when signing million-dollar contracts. She turned toward the window, where her reflection stood tall against the skyline in a cream silk blouse and tailored black pants, no longer the woman they had expected to remain small. On the far wall hung the first dress she had ever designed after the divorce, a simple black gown stitched by hand in a Brooklyn studio so cold she used to warm her fingers over a paper cup of coffee. That dress had built an empire. That dress had taught her that elegance could be armor. Naomi looked at it for a long moment, then back at the invitation. "Send a reply," she said softly. Claire blinked. "You're going?" Naomi picked up her gold pen, the one engraved with her mother's words, "Walkin' like God already made room." She wrote one sentence on the response card, each letter steady, each stroke quiet as thunder. "I will attend." Then she placed the card back in the envelope and handed it to Claire. "They invited the woman they abandoned," Naomi said, her voice calm enough to chill the air. "But the woman who arrives will be the one they never saw coming." Before the world knew Naomi Carter as the woman who could turn fabric into fortune, Ethan Whitmore had known her as the girl who stayed late in the university library with a pencil tucked behind her ear in sunlight caught in her braids. They met at Columbia during a scholarship reception neither of them wanted to attend. Ethan was there because his father had donated a wing to the business school, And Naomi was there because her name had been printed on a small card beside the words Community Leadership Award. He wore a navy suit that looked effortless and expensive. She wore a pale blue dress she had altered herself the night before, stitching the hem by hand in her tiny apartment while her mother reminded her over the phone that elegance was never about money. Ethan noticed her because she was the only person in the room who did not seem impressed by him. Naomi noticed him because, for one rare evening, he looked less like a Whitmore heir and more like a lonely young man trapped inside a famous last name. Their first conversation lasted 12 minutes beside a table of untouched appetizers, but Ethan remembered every second. Naomi spoke about building businesses that gave women a way out of dependence. Ethan spoke about wanting to prove he was more than his family's shadow. By the end of the night, he had offered to walk her to the subway, and she had laughed softly, telling him she did not need rescuing, only company. That was how it began. Not with diamonds. Not with promises. Just two people walking beneath streetlights on Broadway, sharing coffee from a paper cup while the city breathed around them. For a while, Ethan loved Naomi with the kind of focus that made her believe courage could be learned. He came to her mother's apartment in Queens and ate Sunday dinner from chipped plates without complaint. He listened when Grace Carter spoke about working double shifts at the hospital laundry and still finding time to teach her daughter how to stand straight in rooms that expected her to shrink. He held Naomi's hand in small restaurants, kissed her forehead outside subway stations, and told her that the world would have to make room for them. When he proposed 2 years later, it was not at a country club or beneath a chandelier. It was on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise, with traffic humming behind them and the East River glowing like poured gold. Naomi said yes because she believed the man kneeling before her was brave enough to choose love in daylight. For the first few months of marriage, she almost convinced herself she had been right. Their apartment on the Upper East Side smelled of fresh lilies and new beginnings. Ethan left notes on the refrigerator. Naomi filled sketchbooks with designs for the fashion company she dreamed of building. At night, they stood by the windows and imagined a future where his influence and her vision could create something honest. But old money has a way of entering a home without knocking. It began with small corrections. His mother, Evelyn Whitmore, suggested Naomi wear softer colors to family dinners because bold shades made people stare. His father, Richard, reminded Ethan that public image mattered when billion-dollar deals were being negotiated. At charity luncheons, Naomi's name was placed at the wrong table. At private events, photographers were asked to focus on Ethan alone. The first time he introduced her as his wife, his voice was warm. The 10th time, it was careful. By the 20th, he avoided the word entirely. Naomi is helping with the foundation, he would say, his hand resting lightly on her back as if touch could replace truth. She smiled because she had been raised with grace, but each smile cost her something. In the car afterward, Ethan always apologized. He said his family needed time. He said the board was watching. He said the world they lived in was complicated. Naomi listened to every excuse and stored them quietly beside the growing silence in her chest. She did not ask him to fight every room. She only wanted him to stop hiding her in them. One evening, after a Whitmore dinner where Evelyn praised Madison Blake for being exactly the kind of woman who understands legacy, Naomi stood before the bathroom mirror and removed her pearl earrings one at a time. Ethan came in behind her, loosened his tie, and said nothing. In the reflection, she saw the truth before he spoke it. He loved her in private. But he feared what loving her publicly would cost him. That was the night Naomi first understood that being unwanted was painful, but being half chosen by the man who promised forever was worse. The night Ethan chose another woman began with music soft enough to sound like forgiveness. The Whitmore Foundation Gala filled the grand ballroom of the Astoria Regent with gold light, white roses, and the quiet confidence of people who had never needed to wonder whether they belonged. Naomi arrived alone, though she was still Ethan's wife, wearing a deep emerald gown she had designed herself, its clean lines graceful against her skin, its color chosen because Ethan once told her green made her look like spring after a long winter. She had spent the afternoon convincing herself that tonight would be different. Ethan had promised he would introduce her properly. No vague words. No careful smiles. No placing her at the edge of conversations like a decorative secret. Tonight, everyone will know, he had said that morning, fastening his cufflinks without meeting her eyes. Naomi wanted to believe him so badly that belief itself felt like an act of courage. The ballroom shimmered when she stepped inside. Crystal chandeliers hung above the crowd like frozen stars, and waiters moved between silk gowns and black tuxedos with trays of sparkling water and champagne. A string quartet played near the marble staircase. Cameras flashed by the sponsor wall. Naomi searched for Ethan through the moving crowd, her heart steady at first, then slower, then strangely cold. She found him near the center of the room, exactly where a Whitmore was expected to stand. He was laughing with Richard and Evelyn, his posture polished, his smile practiced. Beside him stood Madison Blake in a champagne-colored dress that caught every light in the room as if it had been made for attention. Around her neck was a diamond necklace Naomi recognized instantly. She had seen it once in Ethan's private safe, wrapped in black velvet, while he told her it had belonged to his grandmother and would one day be given to the woman the family publicly embraced. For 1 second, Naomi forgot the noise of the room. She forgot the music, the cameras, the warm perfume of roses. All she could see was that necklace resting against Madison's throat like a verdict. Madison noticed her first. Her smile widened, smooth and sharp, and she touched the diamonds with 2 fingers as if adjusting a crown. Ethan turned then. Their eyes met across the ballroom. He did not look surprised. That was the part Naomi would remember years later. Not the necklace. Not the whispers. Not even Madison's smile. She would remember that Ethan looked as if he had been waiting for her to understand. Naomi crossed the room with the kind of calm that made people step aside without knowing why. Every footstep sounded clear against the marble floor. Ethan's face tightened as she approached, and Richard's expression hardened into warning. Evelyn lifted her chin, already preparing to pretend the moment was less cruel than it was. Naomi stopped in front of Ethan and looked at the necklace before looking back at him. "Tell me I am mistaken," she said quietly. Ethan swallowed. Madison tilted her head, almost amused. "About what, Naomi?" she asked, her voice sweet enough to pass for innocence if no one listened closely. Naomi did not look at her. "I am speaking to my husband." The word husband landed between them with more force than a shout. A few conversations nearby faded. Ethan glanced around, and in that small movement, Naomi saw everything. He was not worried about her pain. He was worried about the audience. "This is not the place," he said under his breath. Naomi's eyes did not move from his. "Then choose a place where you can tell the truth." His jaw tightened. For a moment, the man from the Brooklyn Bridge flickered behind his eyes, the man who once promised that the world would have to make room for them. Then the air returned. Cold. Careful. Cowardly. "Madison understands my life," Ethan said, each word measured for the room around him. "She understands what my family needs, what the company needs, what this world requires." Naomi felt the sentence enter her like winter air through an open door. She waited for him to stop. He did not. "She belongs here," he added, softer now, but not softer enough to spare her. "You never really did." The quartet kept playing. Someone across the room gave a nervous laugh and then fell silent. Naomi looked at Ethan for a long moment, searching for shame, regret, even fear. She found only relief, as if saying the cruel thing aloud had freed him from the burden of pretending to be brave. Madison slipped her hand through his arm. Evelyn looked away. Richard took a sip of his drink. The entire room became a mirror, and in it Naomi saw the truth with perfect clarity. Love had not ended because Madison arrived. Love had ended because Ethan had been offered a choice between his wife and his image, and he had chosen the version of himself that fit more comfortably beneath a chandelier. Naomi nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition. "Thank you," she said. Ethan blinked, confused. "For what?" Naomi's voice stayed calm, though something sacred inside her had just closed its doors. "For finally saying in public what you have been living in private." Then she turned and walked away, the emerald fabric moving behind her like the last green thing in a room full of gold, while Ethan stood beside the woman his family preferred and watched the wife he had hidden become the one person he could no longer reach. By the time Naomi returned to the penthouse, the city had begun to rain. Not a storm, not the dramatic kind that begged to be remembered, but a steady Manhattan rain that blurred the windows and turned the streets below into ribbons of reflected light. The apartment was exactly as she had left it that morning, and somehow that made everything worse. The white lilies on the dining table still leaned toward the glass vase. Her sketchbook still rested open beside the sofa, one unfinished dress drawn in charcoal across the page. Ethan's jacket hung over the back of a chair, expensive and careless, carrying the faint scent of cedar and the life he had been living in two separate worlds. Naomi stood in the entryway for a long moment without turning on the lights. She wanted the darkness to tell the truth first. This had been their home. Or at least, she had tried to make it one. She had chosen the cream curtains because Ethan said they softened the room. She had placed framed photographs along the hallway, careful little monuments to birthdays, vacations, quiet Sundays, and the morning on the Brooklyn Bridge when forever had looked simple. Now every picture seemed to be watching her with the patience of witnesses. Ethan came in 23 minutes later. Naomi knew because she watched the clock above the kitchen door move through each minute with almost ceremonial cruelty. He entered without surprise, as if he had expected her to be waiting, as if the gala had only moved a conversation from one polished room to another. His tie was loosened. His expression was tired. Not broken. Not ashamed. Tired, as though her heartbreak had become an inconvenience scheduled too late in the evening. "Naomi," he said, closing the door behind him. She turned from the window. "Do not say my name like it is something you're trying to calm down." He stopped. The rain tapped softly against the glass. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them held every apology he had never made and every question she had stopped asking. Ethan walked to the bar cart and poured water into a crystal glass, though he did not drink it. "Tonight got out of hand," he said. Naomi almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because the sentence was so small beside what he had done. "No," she said. Tonight became honest. He set the glass down. "My family is complicated. The company is under pressure. Madison's father is prepared to back the expansion deal, and Richard believes the marriage will stabilize everything." "The marriage," Naomi repeated. The words sounded foreign in her mouth, like a language spoken by people who traded hearts as assets. Ethan looked at her then, and something like discomfort crossed his face. "I did not plan for it to happen this way." "But you planned for it to happen." He looked away. There it was. The answer without the courage of a sentence. Naomi walked slowly to the hallway table where their wedding photograph sat in a silver frame. In the picture, Ethan was laughing, his forehead pressed gently to hers, the Brooklyn morning glowing behind them. She remembered how cold the wind had been that day and how warm his hands felt around hers. She remembered believing him. She lifted the frame and placed it face down. The small sound it made against the wood felt final. Ethan's voice lowered. "I can make sure you are taken care of." Naomi turned back to him. "Taken care of?" He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed an envelope. It was cream-colored, heavy, familiar in its arrogance. "A settlement. More than fair. You can keep the apartment in Brooklyn, the savings account, whatever you need to start over comfortably." For the first time that night, Naomi felt anger rise, not loud, not wild, but clean and bright as a blade of morning light. He thought this was mercy. He thought money could walk into the place where loyalty had failed and call itself kindness. She took the envelope from his hand, opened it, and looked at the check inside. The number was large enough to insult her twice. Once as a wife. Once as a woman. Naomi tore it carefully down the middle. Then again. The pieces fell onto the marble floor like pale leaves. Ethan stared at them, stunned. Naomi, be reasonable. She reached for her wedding ring. It had been on her finger through every whispered introduction, every lonely dinner, every moment she had defended him to herself. The diamond caught the dim light once before she slipped it off. She placed it on the marble between them, not thrown, not dropped, but set down with the dignity of something being returned to its rightful silence. I was reasonable every time I waited for you to become brave, she said. Ethan's face tightened. You do not understand what this world demands. Naomi looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a powerful man, but a frightened one dressed in power. No, Ethan. I understand exactly what it demands. It demands that people like you sacrifice people like me and call it legacy. The rain thickened against the windows. Somewhere far below, a siren passed and faded into the city. Naomi walked to the closet, took out one suitcase, and began placing her clothes inside with steady hands. Ethan followed her to the bedroom doorway but did not cross it. Where will you go? He asked. She folded a black dress over her arm, the first design she had ever made for herself. Somewhere I do not have to be hidden. His voice changed then, softer, almost afraid. Naomi. She closed the suitcase. One day, you will wish you had been brave enough to stand beside me. Then she walked past him, past the lilies, past the photographs, past the life that had asked her to disappear politely. At the door, she paused only once, not to look back, but to breathe. When Naomi stepped into the hallway, she left the ring on the marble floor, and with it, the last version of herself that had ever begged to be chosen. Naomi did not collapse when the elevator doors closed behind her. She did not press her back against the wall and slide to the floor the way broken women did in movies when the music wanted permission to pity them. She stood upright, one hand on the handle of her suitcase, the other resting over the empty place where her wedding ring had been. The elevator descended from the penthouse in perfect silence, passing floor after floor of wealth she had once mistaken for safety. By the time she reached the lobby, the doorman, Mr. Alvarez, looked at her suitcase and understood enough not to ask questions. He simply opened the glass door and said, "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Whitmore." Naomi paused beneath the awning, rain silvering the sidewalk beyond. For the first time in years, the name sounded like a coat that no longer fit. "It is Carter," she said softly. "Naomi Carter." Then she stepped into the rain and raised her hand for a cab. Brooklyn welcomed her back without ceremony. Her old apartment was gone, rented to someone else, so she took the only place she could afford on short notice, a narrow studio above a closed bakery in Bedford-Stuyvesant with one window, uneven heat, and pipes that complained every morning at 6 o'clock. The walls smelled faintly of flour and winter. The floorboards creaked under every step. The bathroom mirror had a crack in the corner that split her reflection into two versions of the same woman, the one who had been left, and the one who had not yet decided what she would become. On her first night there, Naomi placed her suitcase beside a borrowed sofa, hung her black dress on the back of the door, and sat beneath the window while headlights moved across the ceiling like slow ghosts. Her phone filled with messages she did not answer. Some came from society wives pretending concern while fishing for details. Some came from reporters asking whether the Whitmore divorce rumors were true. One came from Ethan at 1:17 in the morning. It said only, "Please be reasonable." Naomi deleted it without replying. Reasonable had been the word used by people who wanted her pain to remain convenient. The next morning, she woke before sunrise and made coffee in a chipped mug her mother had given her years earlier. Grace Carter arrived at 8 with 2 grocery bags, a warm scarf, and eyes that softened only after she saw Naomi standing. She did not ask for the story immediately. She set bread on the counter, folded the scarf over a chair, and looked around the small room as if measuring how much dignity could fit inside four walls. "Baby," Grace said at last, "you can grieve here, but you cannot disappear here." Naomi nodded once, and that was enough. For the next few weeks, grief became a quiet roommate. It sat beside her while she opened a separate bank account, signed divorce papers, and changed her name back on every document that mattered. It followed her to interviews where hiring managers recognized her from gossip columns and suddenly became polite in the wrong way. It waited in the corners of the studio while she sketched designs late into the night, her fingers stiff from cold, her eyes burning from exhaustion. But grief was not the only thing in that room. There was thread. There was fabric. There was memory. There was the black dress hanging on the door, the one she had carried out of Ethan's penthouse like a folded piece of night. One evening, after another investor dismissed her idea as too personal for the luxury market, Naomi returned home with $10 left after subway fare and groceries. She stood before the dress for a long time. Then she took it down, laid it across the small table, and began to alter it. She removed the soft edges and sharpened the lines. She raised the neckline, narrowed the waist, and added a single seam of ivory thread inside the hem where no one could see it. Not decoration. A reminder. Even in darkness, she would carry light where it belonged, close to the ground that held her up. That dress became the first piece in a collection she named Unhidden. She photographed it herself against the brick wall behind the bakery, using a borrowed camera and morning light. She wrote the description in one sentence: "For the woman who was never small, only surrounded by people who needed her to be." The first order came from a school principal in Atlanta. The second from a nurse in Chicago. The third from a young attorney in Houston who wrote that she had worn the dress to court and felt, for the first time, like the room could not erase her. Naomi printed every message and taped them to the wall above her sewing machine. Soon the cracked mirror reflected more than survival. It reflected boxes stacked by the door, fabric rolls leaning in the corner, sketches pinned like prayers, and a woman who no longer measured her worth by the man who had failed to see it. The world thought Naomi Carter had fallen from the Whitmore penthouse. They did not know she had landed on the first floor of her own empire. 5 years later, the studio above the closed bakery existed only in photographs Naomi kept inside a black leather album on the bottom shelf of her office. She never displayed them for guests. She did not need anyone to admire how far she had climbed, because the climb itself had already changed the shape of her soul. Carter Maison now occupied 3 floors of a glass tower on Madison Avenue, with a showroom in Soho, a production partnership in North Carolina, and a scholarship foundation that paid tuition for young women who had talent, discipline, and no wealthy last name to open doors for them. The company's signature collection, Unhidden, had become more than fashion. It had become a language. Women wore Naomi's dresses to board meetings, graduations, courtrooms, interviews, and the first dinners after leaving lives that had made them feel invisible. Every garment carried a single ivory stitch hidden inside the hem, a quiet promise that dignity did not need permission to exist. On the morning Forbes published Naomi's profile, the headline called her the millionaire designer who turned silence into a luxury brand. Naomi read the article once, corrected 2 dates in her mind, and placed the magazine on Grace Carter's kitchen table in Queens. Her mother stared at the cover for a long time, one hand pressed over her mouth, then touched Naomi's photograph with the same fingers that had once folded hospital sheets for double shifts. "You look like yourself," Grace whispered. Naomi smiled because it was the highest praise her mother could give. Success did not make her louder. It made her clearer. She still arrived before most of her staff, still walked the production floor with coffee in one hand and a measuring tape around her neck, still remembered the names of interns and seamstresses and delivery drivers. Her office was beautiful, but not cold. Cream walls, walnut shelves, fresh white roses, sketches framed in black, and the first dress from the Brooklyn collection hanging beneath museum glass like a flag from a country she had built with her own hands. Claire, now her chief operations officer, often joked that Naomi could read a room faster than most people could read an email. Naomi could read fear in a young designer's posture, pride in a tailor's careful silence, and dishonesty in the polished smile of an investor who thought kindness meant weakness. She had learned all of that from the Whitmores. She had learned more from surviving them. Ethan heard her name long before he saw her again. At first, it arrived as background noise in rooms he still believed belonged to him. A board member mentioned Carter Maison as a rising brand with unusually loyal customers. A private banker praised Naomi's expansion strategy over lunch. Madison complained that every magazine was suddenly obsessed with that woman, saying the words with a light laugh that did not hide the bitterness beneath. Ethan said little. He had become skilled at saying little. His engagement to Madison had pleased his family, steadied the public image, and secured several introductions Richard Whitmore considered essential. On paper, it looked like the correct choice. In photographs, Madison looked perfect beside him, blonde, polished, familiar to every old money circle that had once treated Naomi like a question no one wanted to answer. Yet Ethan had developed a habit he hated. Whenever Naomi appeared on a screen, he stopped moving. A business interview in which she spoke about ethical manufacturing. A charity gala where she announced a $1 million education fund. A short video of her walking through her showroom while young women applauded. He told himself it was curiosity. Then irritation. Then professional interest. But none of those words explained the hollow pause in his chest when he saw her standing beneath bright lights with the calm of a woman who no longer needed anyone to introduce her. One afternoon, in the Whitmore conference room, Richard placed a financial report in front of Ethan and said the company needed outside capital before the end of the quarter. The expansion Madison's father had promised to support had slowed, then tightened, then turned conditional. Markets had shifted. Debts had grown. Reputation alone could not pay lenders. Ethan scanned the report, his jaw tense. Who is still interested? Richard avoided his eyes for half a second too long. Hayes Capital is leading a women-founded luxury investment group. They are reviewing us. Ethan looked up. Julian Hayes? Richard nodded. And Carter Maison is one of their strategic partners. The name entered the room like a door opening in winter. Madison, seated near the window, stiffened. Ethan stared at the report, but the numbers blurred. 5 years ago, he had left Naomi with a check on a marble floor. Now the future of his family's company might depend on the empire she built after refusing to cash it. That evening, Naomi stood alone in her office as the sun lowered behind Manhattan, turning the windows gold. Claire entered with the final guest list for the Whitmore-Blake wedding and placed it beside a fresh white envelope. Your reply was received, she said. They confirmed your attendance. Naomi looked at the skyline, then at the black dress beneath glass, then at the ivory gown waiting on a mannequin near the far wall, unfinished but already luminous. She picked up a needle threaded with ivory silk and made one small stitch by hand. Not because she needed to. Because some victories deserved to remember where they began. The Waldorf Meridian looked as if it had been built for people who believed history belonged to them. Its limestone entrance rose above Fifth Avenue in pale columns, its brass doors polished to a mirror shine, its red carpet stretching from the curb to the lobby beneath a canopy of white roses and camera flashes. By 4 o'clock, the hotel had become a theater of wealth. Black cars arrived one after another, releasing senators, financiers, socialites, board members, and women in gowns that whispered against the marble floors like secrets being carried into judgment. Inside the Crystal Dome ballroom, Madison Blake stood before a wall of white orchids, accepting compliments with a smile so bright it almost hid the tension at the corners of her mouth. She had planned every inch of the day. The 12-foot floral arch. The champagne tower. The string orchestra. The custom monogram projected in gold across the dance floor. She had also planned Naomi's humiliation with the same precision. A seat had been placed near the back, not with the family, not with the business partners, but close enough for everyone to see her if she arrived. Madison had imagined a quiet entrance, a plain dress, a lowered gaze, perhaps even the fragile satisfaction of watching Ethan's past understand its place. Did she confirm? Madison asked for the third time, her voice low as a makeup artist adjusted one final curl near her cheek. Her maid of honor glanced at her phone. Yes. Naomi Carter is on the guest list. Madison's smile sharpened. Good. Across the ballroom, Ethan stood near the altar in a black tuxedo, his cuff links cold against his wrists. He had spent the morning moving through rituals that should have felt triumphant. Photographs with Richard, a toast from Madison's father, congratulations from men who measured marriage by strategy and stock value. Yet his mind kept returning to one name printed on the guest list in clean black letters. Naomi Carter. Not Whitmore. Carter. The difference felt small enough for ink and large enough to divide a life. Richard approached him with a glass of sparkling water and the controlled expression of a man pretending not to be worried. Remember, he said quietly, tonight is about stability. Ethan looked toward the doors. Is that what we are calling it now? Richard's eyes narrowed. Do not get sentimental. Sentiment is what put us in this position years ago. Ethan almost answered, but the orchestra shifted into a softer piece, and the ballroom doors opened for another wave of guests. He turned instinctively. It was not her. Not yet. At exactly 4:37, the atmosphere changed before anyone understood why. The cameras outside, which had been flashing in polite rhythm, suddenly erupted in a storm of white light. A murmur moved through the lobby, then through the hallway, then reached the ballroom like wind moving beneath a closed door. Madison looked up. Ethan stopped breathing for half a second. The event coordinator pressed a hand to her earpiece, listened, and went pale with professional surprise. What is happening? Madison demanded. No one answered quickly enough. Then the main doors opened. Naomi Carter entered beneath the crystal dome in an ivory gown that seemed to gather the light rather than reflect it. It was not bridal. It was not loud. It was something far more dangerous in a room built on performance. It was effortless. The gown moved with clean architectural grace, its long sleeves fitted, its neckline elegant, its hem carrying a single hidden stitch of black thread only Naomi knew was there. Her hair was swept back from her face, her diamonds minimal, her posture calm enough to make the entire ballroom feel overdressed. Beside her walked Julian Hayes, silver-haired, composed, one of the most respected investment attorneys in New York. Behind them came Claire, two Carter Maison executives, and representatives from Hayes Capital, each greeted by hotel staff with the kind of urgency reserved for people who signed checks large enough to change the evening. The whispers began at the back and traveled forward. That is Naomi Carter. The designer? I thought she was his ex-wife. She is worth more than the Blake partnership now. Madison's face lost its color one careful shade at a time. Ethan did not move. He saw the woman who had once stood in their penthouse with a suitcase in her hand, and he saw the woman before him now, unhidden, unhurried, untouched by the shame he had expected time to leave behind. The event coordinator stepped to the microphone near the orchestra, her voice trembling only slightly as she corrected the program Madison had so carefully arranged. Ladies and gentlemen, before the ceremony begins, the Whitmore Foundation would like to acknowledge tonight's principal donor and strategic partner, Ms. Naomi Carter, founder and chief executive officer of Carter Maison. The applause began uncertainly, then grew, then filled the dome until even the chandeliers seemed to vibrate with it. People stood. Board members stood. Richard stood because everyone who mattered was watching. Madison remained frozen beneath the orchids, her perfect smile gone. Naomi did not look at her first. She looked at the room. The same kind of room that had once made space for everyone except her. Then her eyes found Ethan. He looked as if memory had finally become heavier than pride. Naomi gave him a small, graceful nod, not warm, not cruel, simply complete. She had not come to beg for a seat. She had arrived as the reason the room had to stand. For several seconds after Naomi's name filled the ballroom, no one seemed to remember what kind of event they were attending. The orchestra held its last note too long, the officiant lowered his folder, and the guests who had risen in applause remained standing as if sitting down too soon might look like disrespect. Naomi moved through the aisle with Julian Hayes at her side, her ivory gown quiet against the runner Madison had chosen, her face composed beneath the crystal light. She did not hurry. She did not search for approval. Every step carried the strange calm of a woman who had once been forced to leave a room and had returned owning the door. Madison watched from beneath the orchid arch, her bouquet held too tightly in both hands. She had expected whispers of pity. Instead, she heard admiration. She had expected Naomi to arrive as an old embarrassment. Instead, Naomi had entered as the largest donor in the room, the strategic partner whose investment group had quietly become essential to the Whitmore Foundation's survival. Madison turned toward Richard, but Richard was not looking at her. He was looking at Naomi with the strained politeness of a man who had just realized pride was more expensive than debt. "Why was I not told?" Madison whispered. Richard's mouth barely moved. "Because you were busy planning a spectacle." Ethan heard them, but the words seemed to come from far away. His eyes remained on Naomi. 5 years had changed her, but not in the way he had once imagined. He had told himself she would become bitter. He had told himself she would fade into the ordinary life his family believed suited her better. Instead, she had become sharper, warmer, brighter, not softened by loss but refined by it. The woman standing near the front row was not trying to punish him, and somehow that was worse. Punishment would have given him a role to play. Her peace left him with nothing but memory. The event coordinator guided Naomi to a reserved seat near the front, not the chair Madison had placed at the back. Claire exchanged one quiet sentence with the coordinator, and suddenly 2 staff members removed the old seating card as if it had never existed. Naomi sat with graceful ease, Julian beside her, while several board members crossed the aisle to greet her before the ceremony could continue. "Miss Carter," one of them said warmly, "your foundation work has been extraordinary." Another added, "We are honored by your support tonight." Naomi thanked them with measured kindness, never raising her voice, never allowing the moment to become ugly. That restraint unsettled the room more than anger would have. Madison's cheeks flushed beneath her makeup. She stepped down from the small platform and approached Ethan, her smile tight enough to break. "Fix this," she said. Ethan looked at her for the first time as if he were truly seeing the woman he had chosen. "Fix what?" "Her. This. The way everyone is acting like she is the bride." Ethan's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for Madison to notice. "She is not acting like anything." Madison's eyes narrowed. "Do not defend her today." The word today hung between them, revealing more than she intended. Ethan glanced toward Naomi, who was speaking with an elderly board member and smiling with a gentleness that made the man's shoulders relax. He remembered another night, another room, another version of himself watching her stand alone while he chose silence. The shame came slowly, not like lightning, but like water rising under a locked door. Richard stepped close to Ethan, his voice low and urgent. "The Hayes Group is watching everything. Carter Maison's participation is tied to the foundation partnership and the restructuring conversation next week. Whatever you feel, contain it." Ethan almost laughed. Contain it. That had always been the Whitmore family commandment. Contain love. Contain truth. Contain the woman who did not fit the portrait. Across the aisle, Naomi lifted her eyes and met his. There was no hatred there. That was what undid him. Hatred would have meant she was still carrying him. Instead, her gaze was clear, distant, complete. Before he could stop himself, Ethan stepped away from Madison and walked toward her. The room noticed immediately. Conversations thinned. Madison whispered his name, but he kept moving. When he reached Naomi's row, Julian rose halfway, not threatening, simply present. Naomi touched Julian's sleeve once, and he sat back down. Ethan looked at her, and for a moment all his rehearsed dignity disappeared. Naomi, he said. Her name sounded different in his mouth now, less like possession and more like regret. I did not know you were involved with the foundation. Naomi folded her hands in her lap. There is a great deal you did not know about me. He swallowed. I wanted to speak with you before today. You had 5 years. The sentence was soft, but it landed with perfect weight. Ethan looked down, then back at her. My wife, he began, the old word escaping before he could stop it. Naomi's expression did not change, but the air around them seemed to still. She stood slowly, bringing herself eye to eye with him beneath the chandeliers that had once made him feel powerful. Your past, Ethan. She said. Not your wife. A hush moved through the front rows. Ethan's face tightened as if the correction had reached a place no apology could cover. Madison stood frozen near the altar, watching the man she was about to marry look at Naomi as though he had finally found the door he should never have closed. Naomi turned slightly toward the ballroom, her voice calm enough for those nearby to hear. I came here to honor a commitment to the foundation, not to reopen a wound. Then she looked back at Ethan. Please do not mistake my presence for permission. She sat again, elegant and unshaken, while Ethan remained standing in the aisle, surrounded by white roses, old money, and the unbearable knowledge that the woman he once hid had become the only person in the room no one dared to diminish. The ceremony never truly recovered after Naomi sat down. The flowers were still perfect, the orchestra still polished, the chandeliers still bright enough to make every diamond in the room answer back, but something invisible had shifted. The room had watched Ethan walk toward his past and return with nothing in his hands. Madison stood beneath the orchid arch with a smile she could no longer hold, while Richard whispered urgently to 2 board members near the front row, trying to stitch control back into a moment that had already torn open. The officiant cleared his throat and asked if everyone was ready to proceed. No one answered with confidence. Then Julian Hayes rose from his seat and spoke quietly to the event coordinator. A few seconds later, the coordinator stepped to the microphone again, her expression carefully professional. Before we continue, the Whitmore Foundation has requested a brief acknowledgement from tonight's principal donor regarding the new education initiative. Madison turned sharply. This is my wedding, she whispered, but the microphone had already been offered to Naomi. Naomi stood without surprise. She had not planned to take the room from Madison. She had only planned to stand in it without shrinking. Yet some moments arrive already written by every silence that came before them. She walked to the small platform beside the orchestra, not the altar, never the altar, and accepted the microphone with both hands. For a breath, she looked out over the ballroom. She saw the women who had once ignored her now leaning forward. She saw the men who had once measured her by proximity to Ethan now measuring Ethan by proximity to her. She saw Richard Whitmore's rigid face, Evelyn's lowered eyes, Madison's clenched bouquet, and Ethan standing in the aisle like a man who had finally understood that regret could be public too. Naomi did not look away from any of it. Thank you, she began, her voice steady, warm, and clear beneath the crystal dome. I know this is an unusual moment, so I will be brief. A nervous ripple of laughter moved through the guests, then faded quickly. Years ago, I entered rooms like this believing I needed to earn permission to belong. I believed if I was gracious enough, quiet enough, useful enough, then people would eventually make space for me. She paused, and the silence became complete. I was wrong. Some rooms are not designed to make space. Some rooms wait for you to forget your own size. Ethan lowered his eyes. Naomi continued, not cruelly, not bitterly, but with the clean force of truth spoken after years of discipline. Carter Maison was built for women who were told they were too much, not enough, too different, too ambitious, too ordinary, too visible, or too easy to overlook. It was built for women who had to leave with one suitcase and rebuild with two hands. It was built for women whose dignity survived even when love did not. Grace Carter, seated near the side aisle in a navy dress Naomi had made for her, pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Naomi's gaze softened when she saw her mother, then returned to the room. Tonight, our foundation is committing $2 million to create the Unhidden Fellowship, a national program for young women of color pursuing business, design, finance, and entrepreneurship. The first scholarships will be awarded this fall in New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, and Los Angeles. No young woman should have to wait for a powerful family to decide she is worthy of a future. Applause began before she finished the sentence. This time it was not uncertain. It rose with warmth, with respect, with something close to relief. Naomi waited until it settled. Then she looked toward Ethan, not as a wife, not as an enemy, but as a woman standing on the far side of everything he had failed to protect. And to anyone who has ever mistaken someone's silence for weakness, she said gently, remember this. Some people are not silent because they have nothing to say. They are silent because they are building something you will one day have to acknowledge. The applause returned, fuller now, carrying through the ballroom and out into the marble hall. Madison's bouquet trembled in her hands. Richard stared at the floor. Evelyn wiped one tear quickly, as if even remorse needed manners. Ethan did not clap at first. He simply looked at Naomi with the stunned sorrow of a man watching the door of his life close from the outside. Then, slowly, he brought his hands together, not because anyone expected it, but because for the first time in years, he knew she deserved a room standing for her. Naomi handed the microphone back and stepped down from the platform. Julian met her at the aisle. Claire